break the cycle of carbohydrate addiction. You start the carnivore diet, then you go off of it. You do it again, starting the next Monday, and you last 4 days, and then you go off of it. You do it again for another 3 weeks, and you're doing really good. It's tough, but you make it through, and then you go off of it. Then you go back on it, and you're off of it. On and off, on and off, on and off, on and off. It's so difficult. I've been there. I know how frustrating it is. You know it. You want it. You know what you want. It's just tough following through. Let's see if we can break the cycle. What's shaking, bacon? My name's Bruno Panucci. Before we get into today's topic, I want to discuss something. I have an upcoming interview I'm going to be doing with Kelly Hogan. So Kelly Hogan is a 13-year carnivore, just shy of 13 years, and she was zero carb for 5 years beyond that. So some of you out there might know her. If you don't, look her up. I'm going to be doing an interview with her for my 100th episode coming up. So I wasn't going to say anything about it. I was just going to kind of put it out there. But I thought, you know what, maybe some of you have questions you might like me to ask her. So keep them good, keep them respectful, and just put them in the comment section below. I'll do what I can to get as many of those questions to Kelly, and I'll give you the credit for the question. So just leave a comment in the comment section below, and we'll go from there. But to the topic at hand, breaking the cycle of carbohydrate and sugar addiction. It's so difficult, isn't it? Now, if it was easy, it wouldn't be an issue when people switch over to a carnivore diet. There wouldn't be people out there like Kelly Hogan and Steak and Butter Gal offering support groups. There wouldn't be tons of videos out there on how to manage carbohydrate and sugar addiction and how to stick to the carnivore diet when you're going through that first 2 weeks to a month. That's really the most difficult. One thing that you have to keep in mind is this is a carbohydrate addiction. It's an addiction. Now, it's not like an addiction where you're kind of doing bad things just to get some crack. An addiction is an addiction. And I want you to keep that in mind, because if it was an addiction, there wouldn't be a challenge with this. You'd just be able to do it and you wouldn't think twice about it. This is an addiction. It took me 6 years from the time I was 1 year carb free and when I went back to carbs, from November of 2015 all the way to January 2021 before I was consistent with staying zero carb again. I was good for a whole year, and then I reintroduced sugar, and I was very cautious about when I did it, and I just slid off the slope. It was just too much for me, and my portion sizes went out of control, and it took me a long time. Now, I was fighting that battle on a few different fronts. That didn't help, but one of the problems I had was definitely sugar and carbohydrate addiction. So what can you do to manage your addictions? Well, it gets pretty difficult because you want to turn around and do this, but it's tough. Maybe it's because you have a family and you're cooking for them. Maybe it's because you have a spouse or just someone else in your place that always has food around, so it's more tempting. Maybe it's when you're going to work. Maybe it's after work. And so there's always a little thing that can screw you up. Maybe you're doing really well and then just someone shows up and says, hey, let's go for a drink, or whatever it is, right? It just, you go to somebody's house and maybe that's what your trigger is. One thing we want to do is first and foremost, maybe acknowledge that this has you more than you're willing to accept, because it's a difficult road to take, but at the same time, you keep on trying and you keep on trying over and over again, and you just don't make it. And it's nice when you're on the other side. When you get to the 3-month window, it's a lot more manageable. I feel sort of bulletproof after I get to a 3-month window. I've done it maybe twice before. The first time, like I said, I let sugar back in on purpose. And another time I got kidney stones, and that kept me off the carnivore diet for quite a while. But I've been back at it, and not a lick, taste, or bite of anything I'm not allowed to have. I've lost 150 pounds doing this. So not everyone's doing this for weight loss. Some people do it just to feel better, and that's great. Some people do it to manage their health problems. That's great too. But one thing lots of people struggle with is just being consistent and doing that long enough that the cravings go away. And trust me, they do go away. They do go away. It's not an issue after a while. The cravings are really bad for the first month, because even though the first 2 weeks goes by, and that's where you physically have a lot of the symptoms, in the first maybe week to 3 weeks, but after that, you start having little temptations, right, that slip in there. And that's what we want to stop, because that's when it usually slips, when your guard is down, or you're maybe a little more overconfident than you realize, and you go back to it because maybe you spent too much time without any food, and then you were hungry, and then you went back to anything that was in front of you. So we want to prevent that. Let's go over what the cycle is. So it starts with cravings, and they sneak up on you sometimes, right? Sometimes you know you're going to have these cravings, and sometimes you're doing good and all of a sudden you see a commercial, or you just get something in your head and it just triggers wanting to go out and get some ice cream or whatever the junk food is of your choice, or food you shouldn't be eating. So I want you to remember it starts with cravings. So one way to manage cravings is to just stay comfortably full. It's one of the best things you can do, staying comfortably full. I don't recommend intermittent fasting when you're starting this. I don't like the idea of getting to the point where you're hungry when you're starting this carnivore diet. If you can do that and you've been consistent with this, that's great. But if you've been on and off this, I want you to recognize the cycle you're in and try and break the cycle. What happens after that is you get this carb craving behavior where you start maybe obsessing over it and your mind can't stop. So it starts with a craving and then it goes to like an obsession. And then you feel this compulsion to have your carbs or sugar, whatever it is that you're not allowed to have. And then what happens is you often give in. Sometimes it's a slip up and it happens really easily. And other times you fought it, but you just gave into it anyway because the cravings were overwhelming. You get this weird, overwhelming sense of desire to have something. And this is what smokers go through. Now you know what it's like when someone's trying to quit smoking or drinking. It's this compulsion to have something you're not allowed to have. And so what's happened? You've given into it. And now you're at the instant gratification point. And now you're thinking to yourself, man, I gave into it. It tasted good. Those first few bites or whatever it is that you were eating or maybe drinking, you think to yourself, oh, it's so good. But you know what? That's a bad thing, right? Because now you've broken the cycle. You've let that addiction restart. It happens over and over again. Every time you go back, you're resetting that. Just like those old tape recorders when you're resetting the counter, right? And you want to just keep resetting it back to zero. You're doing that with your cravings. You got to break that cycle. I've been there. I know what it's like. And when you stop it, you start going through withdrawals. And that's the last step. You're going through withdrawals. So now you start getting maybe a little headachy. Your energy's off. You probably start getting diarrhea whenever you restart this way of eating. It's not uncommon. And you start getting just this brain fog. And the first few days you feel rough and you have this compulsion to just go off of this way of eating. That's telling you you have an addiction. So we've covered cravings, carb-seeking behavior, carb-using behavior, so you go back to the food that you're trying to stay away from, to the instant gratification when you finally give in, and then when you try and be good again, you go through the withdrawals. So this is a cycle, and I stayed in the cycle for way too long. I want you to minimize this cycle if that's something you're dealing with. I want you to shrink the cycle down so it doesn't keep on perpetuating and going on and on and on. And part of it is to recognize you're in a cycle. You're on it and then you're off of it. And sometimes it goes for months, sometimes it goes for years. Sometimes you could be really good and be carb-free for a year or two. I've seen some people in Facebook groups who say they were carb-free for 2 years, 3 years, and then they just slipped back. And then once they slipped back, they had a rough time getting back on the wagon. Now, I did that the first time I cut out sugar for a year. I thought, I can handle this. I'm doing okay. And then, boom, I just slowly, it took about 3 months before my cravings went out of control. So for me, I went through a bit of overconfidence. I thought I could handle it. I didn't realize how bad my addiction was. And then it became a huge issue. The first thing you have to do is identify the problem behavior, the things that are putting you in those situations where you're constantly giving in. Like, sometimes you can make it past the first week. And if you can make it past the first week, you'll be okay. But you know what? Then you let your guard down and then you cave in week 2, or maybe that's week 6 for you, or maybe it's day 2 for you. I know what it's like, but we have to identify the behavior. Now, another thing we can do is identify the alternative healthy behaviors that we can fall into to replace the bad behaviors. So maybe you're going through a craving, do 30 squats. You can do that at work. You can do it at home, almost any place. You find a number that works for you. If you can sit down in a chair, you can do a squat. The more you do these squats, the more it's going to help your knees and back. So typically using an argument where you have bad knees isn't good because this is going to strengthen your knees. The carnivore diet is going to help get rid of that inflammation and pain as well. So really it's a win-win. Maybe you can go for a walk. Replace these habits of going back to your food with good habits. I think some of these support groups like Kelly Hogan and Steak and Butter Gal offer are really good. Now, I know there's also other people out there, but what happens is you want to become part of these groups because you're going to become a little more self-aware. You're going to be able to help other people, which is really nice. And once you start realizing these triggers that you have, you're going to be a little more self-aware. You're going to be a little more understanding and patient when you see other people go through these problems. And you're going to think, oh, if only you could do it. And you're going to recognize not only what your triggers are, But why that is, maybe it's an emotional trigger. Maybe you give in to emotional eating, and that might stem back to something from your childhood. So I always did emotional eating. That was always an issue for me. When you get used to being carb and sugar free, your mood, and I was never really an unstable guy, but your mood, your highs and lows through the day aren't so high and low. You're more balanced. So after a few weeks or a few months, it's really not an issue. Your mood is better, so you're not going to be doing as much emotional eating. You just got to get over that hurdle. These groups can be like little support groups. So find some on Facebook and find anyone who's doing these coaching groups. They're not that expensive. If you can't do it on your own, maybe it's time you find people to do it with. Become a little more self-aware in the process. No one's perfected this way of eating. There's only people who are further ahead than you. There's always someone who's got a better handle on this than you. So if you're having difficulty sticking with this, seek those people out. So when you replace those habits with new habits, try and make them consistent habits. Do something that's going to help you divert your attention from the cravings you have to something different. Find something new. Don't go back to the old things you've been doing over and over again. So now you want to maintain these habits. So one of the habits I have is actually making these videos. The first thing I've done in years that was pretty consistent has been this carnivore diet. And the second thing was making these videos. I'm finally getting to a point where I'm getting more consistent habits day to day. I'm not trying to start all of them at once. This has happened over the last year and a half. I'm finally getting to this point where it's non-negotiable. I will not go off this carnivore diet. I would rather starve than go off this carnivore diet. I will not stop making these videos. These videos are good for me, and hopefully they're good for you. Most importantly, what I want you to recognize, if this is something you struggle with, to break the cycle. Everything you've been doing hasn't worked well enough. It's just the way it is, right? If you're still struggling going on and off a carnivore diet, you need to find out where your weaknesses are. If you're doing the same things over and over again and you're still in this cycle, you're part of the problem, right? We want to find something that's going to break the cycle. We want to find something new, a new way of dealing with this carbohydrate addiction. Because if you keep going back to it and you can't stop eating it, that's an addiction. Simple as that. So find something new. Find a team, a group, some people out there. Find a routine and do what you can to stick with this way of eating. Because when this works for you, you're going to feel so good when you're on the other side. I want you to be a 2-year carnivore. I want you to get to the point where you're a 5-year carnivore. And I want you to be like the Andersons, or I think it's Joe and Charlene Anderson. And they've been carnivores for over a couple decades and they look great. So I want you to build on your success. And I just want you to succeed. I know what it's like being on the other side of this. Finally, after my years of struggling, I want you to be able to tell me that you did it too. And if you have gotten there, share with everyone what worked for you. What was your major obstacle that finally made you go, wait a minute, I'm not doing this anymore. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Thanks for subscribing and watching this channel. I'm up to almost 1,000 subscribers. I really do appreciate all you people out there who've been tuning in and just watching these videos. So thanks a lot. Take care. And leave any questions for Kelly Hogan in the comment section, and I'll do what I can to get them to Kelly Hogan. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.